Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Caitlin and I upload a whole bunch of different types of videos on this channel, mainly surrounding true crime and psychological cases, as well as a little bit of fashion and lifestyle sprinkled in where I can. Now today I'm back with a case that is quite a big one. It's kind of one of Scotland's biggest unsolved mysteries up until literally the day that I'm filming this. There was a huge update in the case, so I'll go into that at the end of the video. I wanted to still upload this for you anyway, even though the update hasn't really got loads of details with it. I just wanted to film this case for you anyway. So for today's video, we're going to be discussing the absolutely heartbreaking disappearance of a woman named Renee McGregor and her young son named Andrew. But before we get started, I'm just going to run through my usual disclaimer that I like to include at the start of my videos, just letting you guys know that I'm not claiming to be an expert in this case or any of the other cases I cover over on my channel. I'm simply relaying the information I'm able to find myself through certain sources on the internet, and because only certain things are accessible to me, it means I may get things wrong, mispronounce things, or leave things out, and I apologise if I do any of those things. I'm not trying to cause anyone any harm or an injustice. I'm simply working with the information that I have available to me. And aside from the usual disclaimer, with this case specifically, as I said, there is an update that has come out today, the day that I'm filming this. So by the time you see this video, if you're watching it on the day of upload, the update will have been up for about 4 or 5 days, and so I can't obviously predict the future. I don't know what's going to come out of this update. All I can do is share with you the information that I currently have, and so there might be more information that comes out after this video or when this video has gone up. I apologise if that's the case. All I can really say is that I recommend you follow this case personally, because like I said, there might be more updates past this video that I'm unable to include because I have filmed this video 5 days before it goes up. So with all that being said, we shall just go ahead and get started discussing the case of Renee and Andrew McGregor. Renee McGregor was born under the name Christina Catherine MacDonald in February of the year of 1940. She was born and raised in an area just outside of Inverness in Scotland, and she lived with her 2 parents as well as her older sister named Morag. Morag and Renee were said to have been extremely close while they were growing up, and they had a strong relationship into adulthood too. Morag remains a huge part of the investigation to this day, as she continues to spread awareness and search for answers in the case of her missing sister. When Renee was still relatively young, she met a man named Gordon MacRae, whom she would marry in the year of 1963. So Renee was 23 years old at this point, and Gordon was in the process of becoming the owner of a small construction company that had previously belonged to his father. After a few short years of hard work in ownership of this company, Gordon had managed to redevelop the whole company, and as a result it had expanded quite substantially. The growth had continued to the point where their annual income figures were well into the millions, and so it's safe to say that Gordon and Renee lived a relatively comfortable lifestyle. After a few years of marriage, they discovered that Renee was pregnant with their first baby boy, a boy who would soon be named Gordon Jr. And Renee seemed to adapt seamlessly into the role of motherhood. She was known to be an absolutely devoted mother who fell in love with her newborn son. So she was completely devoted to her newborn baby boy. However, it was at this point that her marriage to Gordon Sr. began to face some quite troublesome turmoil. They both just seemed to have a lot on their plate, and their marriage kind of seemed to be taking the brunt of all of this stress and pressure and their exhaustion, and all in all, they weren't in a happy relationship. But then, 5 years after the birth of their first son, Renee fell pregnant again, this time giving birth to a little boy named Andrew. In the year of 1975, when their sons were aged 2 and 8 years old, Renee and Gordon Sr. made the decision to end their marriage and separate. It had really been a long time coming, and despite the births of their 2 gorgeous, healthy, beautiful sons, they just couldn't make their relationship work. And so Gordon Sr. decides to move out of the family home and allow Renee and the 2 young boys to live there together. He does continue to fund their lifestyle. Obviously, as I said, he was relatively well off and successful in his business, so he decided that he would make sure that they had everything they need, that they could afford their home. Renee could be their full-time mother, so she didn't have to work, she didn't have to find any other means to support their lifestyles. So in this sense, they had a very amicable marriage, because even in their separation, Gordon remained supportive and decided to continue funding each of their lives. It's said that Gordon and Renee remained completely amicable, if not completely friendly with one another after their split, and it appeared as though their family kind of seemed to thrive better when they were separated in comparison to when they had been married. As I said, Renee would look after the boys full-time so that they had all of the attention and care that they could ever need, while they did have regular contact with Gordon Sr. They would spend a lot of time with him, weekends with him, go on trips with him, as well as being able to witness both of their parents getting along well and working very seamlessly as a family unit despite the separation. However, not everything in this family was as picture perfect as it may have initially seemed. It would later be discovered that Renee McCrae had actually been having an affair for a number of years. Her and a man named Bill McDowell had been secretly seeing each other in private since the year of 1971, just a few years after the birth of her first son and at the height of all of her marriage troubles. Bill McDowell had not exactly been a stranger to the McCrae family either. He had in fact been an employee at Gordon Sr.'s company for quite some years, and as well as this, he was a close personal friend of Gordon Sr.'s. And to add to the turmoil, Renee's husband would learn at a later point in the investigation into this case, his and Renee's youngest son, Andrew, was not actually his, but his biological father was Bill McDowell. Renee was not the only one married with children throughout the entirety of this affair, as Bill McDowell himself actually had a family. Although according to Renee's best friend Valerie, who remained one of the only people aware of the affair throughout its entirety, he had allegedly promised Renee on numerous occasions that he would be leaving his wife for her. Bill had allegedly told Renee that he had received a job opportunity in the Shetland Islands working for Texaco, and that he wanted to move out there with her and Andrew and start a life together. But this would later turn out to be a complete lie, and Bill admitted to having an affair with Renee, but denied any intention of ever wanting to leave his family, despite Renee allegedly believing otherwise. But Renee was madly in love with this man, and she believed everything he had told her. And so when he said that he wanted to start a life with her in the Shetland Islands, this is exactly what she thought was going to happen. She'd even gone as far as to start packing up her belongings inside her home, ready for the move with her and her youngest son. And this then takes us to the time of her disappearance on the 12th of November in 1976. It was a seemingly typical Friday, and Renee leaves her home with both of her sons in tow, driving her blue BMW 1602 car. Her first stop was to meet up with her estranged husband, Gordon Sr., to drop off the couple's son, Gordon Jr., for a brief stay with his father. She left this meeting in her car alone with her youngest son, Andrew. They started driving in a southern direction on the A9 motorway, but this was sadly the last time the pair were seen. Renee had told her estranged husband that from his house the pair were going to drive towards Renee's sister's home in a place called Kilmarnock, which would be around a 4-hour journey for them to take. It was later believed that the real intention of their trip that day had actually been a weekend away with Bill McDowell, Andrew's biological father. Wherever they were actually heading, the pair never arrived, as that very same night, a man driving a bus down the A9 around 12 miles away from Inverness had spotted an empty BMW car on fire in a lay-by on the road. He'd called emergency services to inform them of the car. By the time the first responders had arrived, they found no one in the car or no one around the car, and it was already extremely burned. They found very little inside the car upon closer inspection, aside from a rug with some bloodstains on it. Police used the number plate on the car as a means of searching the database for the owner of the car, which had been Renee McCrae. And when they began the process of contacting her and her next of kin when she didn't respond, people began to notice that something was wrong, something had happened to Renee and Andrew. Police were able to carry out a set of analyses on the bloodstains on the rug found inside the car, and they discovered that it matched Renee's blood type, which only heightened concern for her safety. From here, the police had very little to go on, and so they began to publicly appeal for any form of witness, anyone who'd maybe seen anything on the A9 that day that may provide them with any updates in the case, any leads that they could start to follow. One of the most concerning sightings had been provided by someone who themselves didn't think at the time it had been anything particularly strange, but since the police were kind of asking for any and all pieces of information, any and all sightings from that day, whether they thought it was relevant or not, they were asking for them to be phoned in, and so they thought it was best to inform them of this sighting. So this witness had been travelling down the A9, and not far from where the parked car would later be found in a lay-by, they spotted a man dragging something heavy along behind him. The witness had seen it briefly. Obviously when you're on a motorway you drive past things quite quickly, and and they said that they'd assumed it had been a dead sheep. But what makes this sighting so unsettling is that if it is true, the day that Renee had left and disappeared, she herself had been wearing a sheepskin jacket. Another witness had reported seeing an unidentified man around the nearby quarry walking with an empty pushchair, and so it was possible that this sighting was related in some way to the disappearance of the mother and son. The search for Renee and Andrew became one of the largest in Scotland's history, and their case remains one of the largest and most known cases to this day. But for a long time, nothing came about in this case. There were no answers for many, many years, despite the extensive efforts gone through by many people, and it was ultimately decided that the most likely scenario had been that the pair had been murdered by someone, since there had been no sign of them whatsoever. It was the police's investigation into Renee's life in hopes of maybe identifying someone that had a grudge against her or had previously threatened her, that they came across the fact that she had been having an affair with Bill McDowell and that he was in fact Andrew's biological father. And so upon learning of this, they immediately had multiple persons of interest in the case. Aside from the possibility of the pair choosing to run away and start a new life, which is obviously a possibility in this case, or them maybe being attacked by a complete stranger, the two main suspects in this case would initially be Gordon Sr., her estranged husband, and Renee's lover Bill. Upon questioning Bill, the police were able to gain a confession for the affair. However, he denied completely of having any involvement whatsoever in hers and Andrew's disappearance. He did, however, explain in detail how the pair were able to carry out their affair without either of their spouses knowing, in which they'd organised almost like a secret type of code for their phone calls. So one of them would ring up the other and let it ring out a certain number of times before hanging up, so the person on the receiving end would know who it was that's calling them, and then they'd wait a certain amount of time, ring back up again, and then they would know who it was that was calling and who it should answer it. And what's so strange about this is that Bill claims that for a number of days after the disappearance of Renee and Andrew, he'd received a couple of these coded phone calls, but they'd never rung back. So he was under the impression that it was Renee that was ringing, but she never rang back a second time. So he, for a long time, was adamant that she was alive somewhere. An interesting occurrence that the investigators witnessed had been in the week following Renee's disappearance, when they'd asked Bill to come in to the local station just for further questioning. According to the police officers in the station that day, Bill had entered looking very visibly upset and distressed. And then, not long after his arrival, Bill's wife Rosemary had stormed into the station, grabbed him by the arm and yanked him out, all the while yelling at the police officers. She was being very abrupt with them and she was just telling them to leave her husband alone. And since that incident, because it was so dramatic and almost unnecessary and unexpected, many people have speculated that that day Bill had been intending on going into the police station, perhaps to confess to getting rid of Renee and Andrew, but since Rosemary had provided him with his only alibi for the night of their disappearance, she wanted to stop him before both of them suffered. But then some people have gone a step further with this theory and speculated that possibly Rosemary could have had something to do with the disappearance more directly, so could she be more involved than initially thought? Aside from Bill, like I said, the main other person of interest in the case was Renee's estranged husband, Gordon Sr. He provided an alibi for the night of the disappearances, and this was then proven and backed up. But aside from this, it just seems to me personally, like while I was initially researching this and reading through the information, I just didn't get the feeling that there was a lot of reason for Gordon to have anything to do with their disappearance. Gordon had told police very early on that for a number of years he had suspected Renee of having an affair. He hadn't known the extent of it or who it had been with, but he had this feeling. However, he stressed many times that their marriage just wasn't working, it wasn't a happy one, and they both just seemed as though splitting up had been the right thing for the pair of them. As well as this, Gordon himself had moved on and was in a very happy relationship. Very shortly after their separation, he'd gotten into a relationship with a woman who'd actually been his secretary for a number of years before, so then by the time that Renee and Andrew disappeared, he'd already moved in with her and they were in like this serious long-term relationship. And so Gordon arguably remains a possible suspect in the disappearance, but I myself find some serious doubts in regards to his involvement, because I just can't find a lot of reason or justification for him wanting to have gotten rid of his ex-wife and a son that wasn't his. I'm sure people argue that he may have been upset with finding out that he wasn't Andrew's biological father, or about the affair, but like I said, he just seemed to have moved on a lot quicker than people had expected, almost as though it hadn't been the biggest of shocks to him. Some months after the disappearances, investigators decided that since their leads that they'd been pursuing previously hadn't really led anywhere, they decided they would investigate the nearby quarry in attempts to just explore any other possible avenues, possibly related to the pair's whereabouts. While they were on site of their search of the quarry, one of the investigators was stood in one spot and suddenly experienced the overwhelming scent of decay and rotting bodies. He himself reported this finding to a superior, and he said that he really wanted to specifically investigate and search that spot because the smell had been so sudden and overpowering that it couldn't not be anything. But after he'd reported this finding to a superior, the excavation was very suddenly cancelled due to an alleged lack of funding, meaning that they couldn't afford any of the equipment they needed to dig up parts of the quarry and search it. Over a decade later, in 2004, the details of this case became of major public focus, and this particular investigator who had found this discovery publicly shared the incident about what he'd experienced at the quarry in attempts to almost like raise awareness of what he had found and how he believed it might have been important to the case. This claim gained a lot of attention, and as a result, a full excavation of the quarry was funded all those years later. Sadly, this more recent update didn't drag up any new evidence, but investigators have discussed the likely possibility of bodies having been buried there at some point and then at a later point moved elsewhere, so dug up and moved, at some point between the years of the first failed excavation and then the successful one carried out in 2004. It was then released 2 years after this update that the investigating team had filed an official report naming their main suspect in the case of Renee and Andrew McRae's disappearance. Although who the suspect was, it hasn't been shared publicly, nor did anything come of it, but they seem to have like a solid belief. They just didn't have enough evidence backing it. And then in more recent years, the case has come back into public focus once again when a local man named Brian McGregor believed to have come across information potentially pertinent to the case. McGregor had been working as a part-time dog walker at the time that this case was taking place, and so he found himself very close to the case in terms of location, and it just kind of piqued his interest. He had shared his interest in this case publicly due to the fact, like I said, he was close to it in location and it was kind of during the height of the investigation, and he received a response from this kind of like online post that he'd shared from 2 men who claimed to have been construction workers on the A9 at the time of the disappearances. These men claimed that the morning after the disappearance of Renee and Andrew, they had been in the area of the quarry and they'd found an area of ground that appeared to have been disturbed in some way, which obviously hadn't really been thought of as anything too strange until some years later. And seeing himself as kind of like an amateur investigator, McGregor decided to follow up on these claims, so he took a metal detector to the area in which these men claimed all those years before they had seen some sort of disturbed ground very close to the date of the disappearance, in hopes of finding something. Even all those years later, he hoped he would maybe just find anything relating to the case. He came across something buried below in the ground around the quarry, although he couldn't be sure himself exactly what it was, although it was speculated he believed that it was a pushchair, what appeared to be a pushchair. So he couldn't dig up the area himself, but he chose to inform the police of what he'd found and the claim of these 2 men that had allegedly worked in the area, just kind of everything that he'd collected himself in hopes of them potentially doing something about it. And yet, allegedly, no one initially followed up on his report. Andrew's pushchair hadn't been inside the family home after their disappearance, and it would have likely been in the car with them as they were off on a trip, which they found no sign of it in the car in amongst the burnt wreck. The pram itself was a Silver Cross Carnival collapsible pushchair with a blue coloured cover and chrome framing, and this remains missing. A few months ago, it was reported that a more recent search of parts of the quarry have led to the discovery of a number of wheels from a pushchair as well as some bones. According to these articles, the help of forensic anthropologists was requested, and as of yet they've only been able to determine the presence of animal bones, but obviously the inspection will continue. Sources claim that the wheels that they'd discovered appeared to be very similar, if not completely match, the ones that were believed to have been on Andrew's missing pram, and tests are to be carried out in order to determine whether these are in fact linked in their case in any way. But it seems like a very likely scenario. To my knowledge, the search of the quarry was to be continued as they examine other findings in the area. But as of the time prior to today, that was the last known update in this case. However, as I said at the start of the video, an update. I've literally just been tagged in an update in this case. So I will tell you guys what this update is. Obviously, like I said in my long-winded intro, that I don't know everything now. So there might be some more further updates by the time this video goes up, and I apologise that I can't include them. But definitely keep an eye on it yourselves. I know I will be. So the most recent update in this case, which came out today, I believe, is that Bill McDowell, Renee's lover and Andrew's biological father, who is now 77 years old, I believe, has been charged with the murders of the pair. There's a whole bunch of different sources, but all I've seen really consistently through all of them is that he has been taken to court for murdering Renee and Andrew. So, like I said, keep an eye out for updates. I'll try and update on my social media if I can. But as of this current point, it looks as though Bill McDowell has been found guilty of murdering Renee and Andrew McCrae all these years later. So that's where I'm going to end today's video, on kind of this awkward note, because I don't know the current updates. I'm really sorry that I couldn't give you more, but I hope you guys found this interesting. Like I said, keep an eye out for the updates. I know I will be. I'll be keeping an eye, see if there's anything new in terms of him being taken to court or anything. But that is everything I know. So thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you found this interesting, and I'll see you guys very soon for another video. Thanks for watching. Bye.